Maryland, right over the DC line. So if I start to any sort of mistakes I make, I'm blaming the time difference.
Totally understand. Makes total sense, Maggie. And yes, thanks for reminding me. I am here in San Diego, California, joining you all. So we're excited to be here again. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Welcome. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and let Maggie get us started and just give us a bit of information on where this project came from.
Great, thank you. So yes, good evening, everyone. We're happy to have you here. This project stemmed as if you joined yesterday also, or if you've heard this presentation at La Cosecha or are familiar with the report. This project started with Dr. Connor Williams, who is our colleague and the lead author on this on the paper. And really was a conversation with a California funder with Sobrato about finding out like what is it that we know and what is it that we don't know about parent interest in dual language. And so Connor connected with Dr. Escobedo at Pique to add the parent lens, and so that's where this came together. Um, so I'm going to just talk very briefly about the research, and then Monique, I'll just cue you perhaps on changing the slides. So we do know there's a lot of research on bilingual education being better for multilingual learners, and dual language immersion being the best of all, which is really that the two-way immersion program where you have equal or at least 30% of one language group together in learning content. And there's a ton of research on that. What we don't necessarily know is why parents are choosing or if parents would choose bilingual education. And despite all this research, it's very political, as I'm sure all of you in California know well, and it sort of ebbs and flows whether or not it's in favor. And despite the long history that we have in the U.S., it's still a controversial topic. But we know that it's the best model for our MLO students. Next slide, please. So what we don't, and it is a little bit odd, what we don't know very well is if Latine, and that is it's just using the inclusive term here for Latino, Latina, or Latinx. It's not a typo, as I heard you say yesterday, Monique. So what we don't know very well is if Latine families want their children to be in dual language or bilingual settings. When I was doing my dissertation research in DCPS, I looked at equitable access to dual language programs. It was part of asking parents why they might want their child in a dual language program, but that was not the focus. And it's interesting to think that we don't really know if they want or why they might want or not want. And so we've heard anecdotally a lot of from teachers that when they started dual language strands, they had to convince the Spanish speaking families that their kids should come. And I've heard this. I mean, this is from California, but I heard this in DC as well. And so that was part of the impetus to do this project and find out, like, really, is that true? Let's see what the parents have to say. So next slide, please. So we wanted to hear as we go through this presentation, we wanted to hear from you as well. And so if you can just put in the chat or if you want to come off mute quickly, I think Isaac, you can raise your hand and Isaac can unmute you. But just what are some
Yep.
common beliefs that you've heard from families about bilingual education and dual language immersion programs? And these can be research-based things, and they could also be like misconceptions, just what you've heard.
Yes, feel free to use the reaction raise hand or type in the chat your questions.
Esta reunión, Irma, es en inglés. Estás hablando, hay alguien en el chat que está preguntando si está en español o inglés. Do we have any closed translation?
There unfortunately are no translation features available for today's webinar.
Okay.
Oh, it looks like we have a question from, do we have a question from Nydia? She took her hand down.
So we're seeing a couple of thoughts in response to and actually, I'm sorry, I was responding to the question, and so I meant to put it in the chat, but I saw the question about the Spanish speaking. Maggie, maybe you can pop it in the chat because since I'm sharing my screen, I'd have to exit out of our
Yeah,
presentation.
sure.
But I'm seeing a couple of people have already started to respond. So the question is, what are some common beliefs that you've heard from families about bilingual education and dual language immersion programs? This could be research-based beliefs and or misconceptions or questions that you have. So we see Shaylee says sometimes families think they should speak English at home so students learn it faster. Malia says parents want English instruction so their children don't experience the same language prejudice they have experienced, and maybe that's a myth, right? Question mark here. And what if the children in bilingual education programs don't learn English well? And Nidia is asking if we might be able to unmute her, so perhaps she wants to share on her microphone, Isaac.
I got it
Yep,
now.
there you go.
Yeah, because it was showing the host was not allowing us. Yeah, lately we have been asking more about if it is good for the students to be in the both languages. Which since I started, I told them yes, please. So at home only Spanish, well, in our language, and then at school they are going to learn. But if they had the opportunity, just put the kids in the immersion or whatever possibility for the both languages. Plus, we lately know about the readings is better for their brains. So some are confused. Some of the parents are confused, of course, but lately I noticed more parents are asking if it's okay.
Very good. Thank you, Nidia. And then I see Katrina says, many years ago as a teacher, I heard a lot of, yo me encargo del español en casa. En la casa queremos inglés. These days, Latina families seem to feel pride and excitement in maintaining Spanish at school and at home. And that's excellent to hear. And so all of these things are really valid, and things that we know that are out there. And so we'll be addressing some of them through this presentation. For now, I have the question in the chat. You can continue to ponder on it and see what you think and see how it might change your perspectives or add to them as we continue to share some data. So that's where we're going to go next. If we're ready, Maggie.
Thank you. Yes, the only other thing I was going to say is one of my favorite studies is a Schechter and Bailey study from like 1997 or 98, which interviewed Mexican American families in Texas and California to get their perspectives on dual language education. And there was a super clear difference between what families wanted in Texas and California. And California fell on the lines of yo me encargo de español en la casa, and in school I want my kids to learn English, whereas Texas was much more in favor of dual language education. And it's interesting to think you can sort of see how that's played out in politics too. And I can put once I switch over to Monique, I'm happy to put the reference in the chat. So if you really want to find it, you can. Next slide. Yes, Monique, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, great. So we conducted focus, well, I shouldn't say we, Connor and his team, but Maggie and I helped with some of the data. So 6 focus groups were conducted in March of 2025. These were all Latina families. They were held in Spanish and English and in 3 communities, Los Angeles, Fresno, and Sunnyvale, all 3 cities here in California. And then there was a survey that was done of over 1,000 families. with school-age children, and this also was conducted in Spanish and English. And so it was to gain the qualitative perspective in terms of what we could learn directly from families in their own words, and then to survey them on a variety of things, including some demographics that we'll be talking about. Oh, this slide didn't
This
Yeah,
advance.
this
slide.
slide didn't. Yeah,
Okay,
here we are.
perfect. I wondered
Thank you.
why things were quiet. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Perfect. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what was found in the focus group. So we found three themes. We were able to identify three themes. First was the perceived benefits of bilingualism. So bilingualism is perceived to improve cognitive and linguistic sophistication, right? That was one of the things we were able to tease out as part of this theme. We had a Fresno participant in English say, I like dual language immersion. My niece speaks Spanish terms like mathematical terms in Spanish. Her vocabulary is far more advanced than mine. Also, tangible educational and financial benefits of bilingualism were noted. Another participant in Los Angeles stated, it has helped me advance in my career personally. I got my job knowing Spanish right there and then. Oh, you know Spanish? My bosses were French. You know Spanish? Show me. Early immersion is also seen as more effective. So the sooner you start, the kids have more energy to learn, said a participant in Sunnyvale. Theme 2 was parental tension and anxieties around bilingualism. So there were intergenerational considerations, right? My mom doesn't really speak English. I just wanted to make sure that my kids were able to communicate with my parents. My mother-in-law did help me out a lot with my daughter. I guess I always wanted them to not lose the language. Parents also seek reassurance about simultaneous language learning. I asked the teacher, is it hurting them? He said they actually learn more. And so as we're going through these themes, again, think about what we were seeing in the chat and what some of you are sharing that you've experienced even within your own families, right? And how students are learning or how they are offered or not offered this type of education. Other anxieties and tensions around bilingualism. Early language separation in school was a deficit experience. So again, taking those parental experiences and then sometimes transferring them on to what, the children's experiences may or may not be, or having a perspective on it, right, that could change an opportunity. I vaguely remember they would pull me aside to learn English. I was so jealous that everybody else was doing other stuff like reading or participating, and I had to be learning English. So unfortunately, when we have kind of this pull-out type of instruction, language instruction, which does still exist in some places in the United States, it can create negative feelings around learning the language or feeling like you're stigmatized in a way or being separated or isolated from your peers. So are there better ways to do it? We know there are different ways to do it. And as we see here, the experiences can sometimes show that perhaps a more inclusive way of doing it is more favorable. Parents also fear being unable to assist with homework in another language. So we wondered what more can schools do? And we're going to talk about this a little bit more throughout the presentation. But this Sunnyvale parent said, I had a friend who put her son in a school like this, meaning Spanish immersion. They struggled a lot with helping them with homework at home that had to be in Spanish. They weren't able to help because they didn't speak it themselves, so they were kind of stuck there. So first of all, are these types of programs available to all students? And if they are there enough resources and supports to make sure that the students who are taking bilingual education are supported when their parents can't necessarily support them at home in whatever the target language is? And so in that case, it's up to schools, districts, and leadership to make sure that that type of support and those resources are available. The third theme was inequitable access to bilingual learning. So access to dual language programs depends heavily on chance, geography, and socioeconomic class. We heard from several participants about lottery systems, again, meaning that this type of education, whether it's dual immersion, bilingual education, heritage language learning, is not necessarily widely available enough. And so some families are having to rely on a lottery system to allow their students to attend in order to be allowed to attend a school where they can get this type of education. So we saw here a parent from Fresno say, it's the ticketed thing. If I wanted to do that, I would have to be in a drawing. Another participant from Los Angeles says, we're on the border. If you cross the street, it is Glendora, but we live in Azusa and it's not great. When he first started high school, we tried to take him to a different city and they gave us a ton of paperwork. They didn't want to take him. Finally, he was able to do it. But sometimes they do make it so difficult they can change, and sometimes with sports. And so this parent is talking about bureaucracy, right? The red tape that exists in trying to get what you need. And then advantages that some students have if, for example, they are on athletics. And so they are more likely to be accepted if they have a transfer request. And so if, a child isn't necessarily, a student isn't necessarily involved in athletics, but still wants access to bilingual education of one of the one of the forms in which it's offered, then they may not be as likely to be chosen, right? And so all of these factors that kind of limit, unfortunately, opportunities to learn a second language or an additional target language for students. Again, here, still one last quote from somebody in Fresno, but now it's more expensive to buy a dozen eggs than it is to buy a piece of meat. We have to work 2 or 3 jobs and we leave our kids hoping that the school is going to teach them things that are good because we're just trying to trust and do as much as we can. But at the same time, you lose these things. You lose a lot of things because we're getting disconnected from it. So it's not that we don't want it. I can't. And so remember that the data here that we're sharing was collected last spring when the price of eggs was all over the news, right? And it was a very real thing that it was very expensive, and inflation has continued. And so now, I'm sure that we're all feeling, steep prices at the grocery store and in most other places. So this hasn't changed per se. But I would say here that why we selected this is to underscore that there are so many competing everyday priorities that families have, that to then add to them that they are also in charge of, making sure that their children become fully proficient without enough support from faculty, like teachers, for example, and other education professionals. It's a lot to ask. And so it doesn't mean that misconception that families don't want their children to be bilingual or multilingual, the misconception that they don't care about it or they don't value it. It's not always the case. It's just that they may have priorities that take precedence, and so they need more support from the school to make sure that they can handle what they're doing at home. So just some things to keep in mind as we try to dispel some of those myths that are out there and that really are rooted in deficit perspectives. And Maggie's going to share a little bit more now from the surveys.
Yeah, so it's just going to share some of the quantitative information that we gathered from the surveys. So as you can see from the graph, nearly 3/4 of the parents who speak another language are fluent in that language. And so we asked you, do you speak another language? You can see 56% said yes. And then if you look down to see where they are in that language fluency, the fluent but reading and writing limited, fluent and can read or write. So the majority of parents were in one of those categories. Next slide, please. And then for their children too, it was a pretty, almost equal. About half of parents saying that they had at least one child who spoke another language. And you can see the when they had to rank what that looked like. About a quarter that said their child could communicate basic needs, another little less than a quarter of conversational, then fluent but reading and writing are limited, and then almost 30% who said that their child was fluent and can read or write the other language. Next, thank you. So the question is bilingualism important? You can see a very large difference in the numbers here. The multilingual families, there were 94% of them that said it is extremely or very important. And for the monolingual English-speaking families, it was 55% that said it was extremely or very important. Thank you. And so these rankings are super high as far as thinking about them being on a 10-point scale. To get a bilingual ed average ranking, like what is your interest, and then dual language immersion specifically, which is that model that I mentioned at the beginning, where you have a ideally equal divide in native speakers of the target language and English learning content together. So you can see that they were very similar as far as parents being interested in bilingual education generally or dual language, and also that it was a very high average on this 10-point scale. Next slide, please. And so just looking at the percent that rated it 8 or higher for both bilingual ed and dual language, you can see a majority, 66% had an 8 or scored it as an 8 or higher, and 65% scored DLI as 8 or higher. So people were really into it. Next, please, Monique. And so just looking at their interest in bilingual education, again, like thinking of the non-Latines, there was 29% that rated it 10 out of 10. And then the percent of Latines that ranked it 10 out of 10 was 40%. So an interesting difference between the two populations, but still a pretty significant chunk who rated it as 10 out of 10 on a 10-point scale. Oh gosh. Okay. So this slide, don't let it get you, I don't know, don't get dizzy from looking at all this data. I'll just point out a few interesting things that you can see. You can see let's look at the left column. So if we're looking at education, you can see that as education levels rise, dual language interest also rises. So you can see like high school degree or less, it's about 71% that have a strong interest. And by the time you get to postgraduate enrollment, which could be a master's or a PhD or like some sort of coursework, it's 89%. And then it's same with income. With the income levels also, it goes up the higher the family income. So you can see under 50,000, it's about 63%. Thank you for using the mouse. And then once you get to above 250, it's over 90% or 90%. What's interesting about this, I think, is, and we certainly see this in DC, I know Katerina, you could attest to this, is the interest from highly educated, wealthier families in dual language education as well. And so at times that can certainly lead to gentrification of dual language schools. And let's see. Okay, I think I'm trying I think we can go forward.
Yeah. So just to point out, this side is just bilingual education, and the other is dual language education, right? And so it's underscoring that as folks become more affluent and have access to higher levels of education, there's a greater interest or perceived value and benefit to this, right? And so I guess that just begs the question of then what about opportunity gaps, right? And making sure that folks who don't have necessarily access to jobs that provide higher levels of income and or opportunities for higher education, helping them understand the value behind this and or making sure it's available to folks from other, as Maggie mentioned, the gentrification that can happen, right? Yeah, so perfect there. And then Maggie, I'll turn it back over to you here.
I just saw Katerina's comment in the chat. I wish we had DL programs so that everyone who wanted could. And at first I was like, wow, that person is totally speaking my language. And then Katerina is a colleague I work very close with in DC. But that is a huge issue, right? Is that we just don't have enough programs for everyone who wants to enroll. So here are some general concerns that we saw in our survey. Learning both English and another language at school is helpful. So it was about, 64% of parents that agreed with that, and saying that it reinforces the language taught at home. You can see teaching my children another language at home is difficult. So it was not a lot of 15% that strongly agreed, but for the most part, people somewhat or strongly disagreed with that statement. Learning both English and another language at school is not necessary as my child is learning another language at home. There was almost a quarter who strongly agreed with that statement, but 40% who strongly disagreed. And if we add in that 22% of somewhat disagree, definitely a majority that did not think that was a correct statement or did not agree with that statement. And then similar to the quote that Monique shared earlier, just asking families if they had felt they had enough time or energy to teach their children another language. And a small amount, about 28%, either strongly agreed or somewhat agreed, but the majority disagreed with that statement, and strongly, for that matter, 49%. Okay, so some of the concerns that we also found, the way language is taught in school is too formal and not practical for everyday conversations. So we did, and I remember Connor saying this, talk about one parent who referenced his child learning Castilian Spanish in school, and some concern over the type of Spanish that the child was learning. So that makes me think of this first statement, that this view that is the language that children are taught too formal. And so 15% saw extremely concerned. And then if you look to the column on the right, you can see it was 70% that found it, that were concerned with that concept. I won't be able to help my child with their homework if it's in a language I don't read. And I'm just going to look at the column on the right. So we'll talk about just the concerned. So 65% of parents or respondents said they were concerned about that piece. Working on becoming bilingual might slow down my child's progress in mastering English. Was over half of parents who were concerned about becoming bilingual, slowing down their child's progress in English. So then if you look at my child may resist learning two languages, there were 64% of parents who were concerned about the resistance that they might face from their child. And then learning two languages could make it more difficult for my child to learn generally. And it was 60% of parents who were concerned about that with that statement. The next slide. Okay, now I'm going to turn it back to Monique.
Thank you. Yeah, so that last slide underscoring some of those concerns and myths that are out there, right? But that we know from the research that actually are not necessarily always founded, right? And in some cases, not founded at all. So important to make sure that families understand and parents and caregivers understand what the options are, what the realities are, and what's true about this type of education and what is kind of like noise that has unfortunately been perpetuated again and rooted in deficit and deficit perspectives, and also sometimes just misunderstandings, right? And so at PIQE, Parent Institute for Quality Education, right, what we do here is engage families. And so what does that mean? And so Dr. Karen Mapp says, who's a pioneer, of course, in this space, family engagement is a full, equal, and equitable partnership among families, educators, and community partners to promote children's learning and development from birth through college and career. And so this is really important. I've bolded some words here. It's a full, equal, and equitable partnership, right? We need to see parents as co-decision makers of their of their children's education. We need to partner with them, right? But that's not always happening. And so family engagement exists to try to bridge that gap that does sometimes happen. What our founders did, Dr. Alberto Ochoa, who's a named author here on this book, and who also conceptualized this 5-level model, but along with PIQE's co-founder, Reverend Vahak, almost 40 years ago, basically our organization started out as a parent meeting in a cafeteria with these two gentlemen sitting down and saying, tell us what you need. Give us a landscape and an idea of what's going on in your community, at your school site, and what are your concerns, what are your needs, what are the resources that you want. And this conversation was specifically for families who did not speak English. They chose as a primary language, they chose the most under-resourced school in San Diego County because that's who they wanted to make sure that they were serving, folks that are typically left out of these decision-making opportunities and students that are often without the opportunities that are afforded to other students, right? And so Dr. Ochoa, with his colleagues, conceptualized this model. And this is how our programming starts. Essentially, we want to make sure we're connected to parents, right? So that they can share with us the myths, misconceptions, doubts, concerns that they have, and also their needs, wants, and desires on behalf of their children. Once we're connected to them, that then paves the way for inclusion and belongingness. If people feel connected, they're going to feel like they belong. They're going to feel like they have a seat at the table, which will then lead to decision making, right? And this happens over time. But again, this is what our programming aims to do, making sure that parents understand that if you're from another country, if you speak a language other than English, English is not maybe your strongest language. You prefer to communicate in a different language. You're new to the United States education system in the country where you are from. Originally, GPAs are calculated using a totally different mathematical system. There's no such thing as A through G requirements. FAFSA was a foreign concept, right, for financial aid. All of these things are the things that we talk about so that parents understand that they have access to this. Their children have access to this. These things exist. Things that they wouldn't know to ask are now, it's the knowledge is being provided to them. So the desire and the willingness to participate and be active, advocates on behalf of their children is there. They just need some tools, right, to kind of put those things into motion. Then it's making sure that we all understand we're all researchers. We all have the ability to ask questions. It doesn't matter what letters we have behind our name, how much school we have completed, right? We're all capable of inquiring and posing problem questions, right? Problematic questions in order to try to find solutions. And then the final level would be macro civic engagement. So seeing parents we have some of our parent ambassadors here tonight, seeing parents get involved at a community level, seeing them get onto school boards or becoming activists and mobilizing within their community and sometimes beyond, right? Maybe getting into politics. And so again, it's a matter of trying to get through all of these levels so that there is greater access and opportunity for families and students that, we want everybody to have access to, but we know it's not afforded to everybody. So this process is what we do here at Pique, but we also want to underscore that schools and educators are not exempt from this process. We can only partner with schools and educators if they're willing to partner with us, right? And they're willing to see us as parents who are co-decision makers, right? We need to make sure we have that mutual understanding. And so how we do it basically is what I've mentioned. Our families are at the center of everything that we do at Pique. We have our programming, which are multi-week workshops that are held. We have served at this point over 2 million children in the almost 40 years that we have been at Pique. We serve tens of thousands of parents per year through our national partnerships and through our partnerships in the state of California. We rely heavily on data and research. I invite you to visit our website if you're interested in any of the research that we've done. You'll find some very enlightening and very rich, data-rich reports there. Our strategic partnerships, as I mentioned, both across California and nationally, whether that's through philanthropy, through districts that we partner with, policymakers, other decision makers, and then advocacy and influence, right? Making sure that we're using what we can in terms of the tools that we offer through our programming and the relationships that we build with families in a way that will advocate, but also help them empower themselves more, to have more influence over not only their children's outcomes, but also outcomes in their community, right? Going back to that 5-step model. Our research has shown, first of all, let me situate us a little bit more for those that are not fully familiar with Pique. Primarily, Pique serves families of color, high numbers of parents that have a home language other than English, household incomes of $60,000 or less per year. What am I missing here? And then education levels typically capped at the primary, meaning 6th grade, or even secondary high school levels. We do serve families and parents that have made their way into undergraduate education and postgraduate education, but typically the families we serve are interested in education, but their children are potentially first generation college students, or higher education students, and sometimes even first generation high school graduates. And thank you. I see the website in the chat. So that's who we're serving. And we understand that parents are interested and want to be involved in all aspects of their child's education, but there are challenges, right? Especially when we're talking about historically minoritized groups and under-resourced groups, and also groups from diverse linguistic backgrounds, right? Caregivers are often, these types of parents are often left out of written and verbal communication in their primary language. We hear this time and again in a variety of types of research that we conduct at Beacon. Generational and other considerations matter when prioritizing bilingual education, and we must understand that Latinas are not a monolith. So an excellent tool that we use at BICA that I would encourage you in your capacity and at your sites to employ, if it's appropriate, our needs assessments, right? We call them our family needs assessments, but the needs assessments, making sure that we first query the families around what they need rather than assigning what we think they might need, right? We can glean from the news and from what we know in day-to-day life about certain populations, things that they might need, and they could be accurate, but they may not be top of mind. So it's important to understand not every person, not every community is the same as the next. And just because people share common demographic traits doesn't mean they're going to need the same things. But what we did find in one of our family needs assessments is this data piece that you see here. 84%, this was over 1,000 people, parents that had responded to us through surveys. 84% in this family needs assessment cycle that's listed here had an interest in dual language immersion programs for bilingual and multilingual growth. I'd like to point out that 9%, significant, right? 9% didn't know or needed more information. And so this again goes to show that we need to make sure we are providing all of the information to all parents in a way that they understand, that the messaging is consistent, so that there are not parents out there scratching their head going, I didn't know that that was something that could be. What is that? I need to know more about it, right? Parents need to be made aware. Families and caregivers need to be made aware. So some bright spots, though, are some notable advancements that support bilingual education. So, for example, as of January 30th, 2024, all 50 states plus Washington, D.C. had established a state seal of biliteracy program. If you're not familiar with this is a seal that goes on the high school diploma, and there are universities that are doing it now too, that basically elevates the skill of being a multilingual individual. So it's not just a symbolic fund of knowledge or something that, you put down as a bullet point on your CV. This is something that's actually on your high school diploma, that's recognizing that this is, a skill to be elevated, to be proud of, and certainly rooted in asset-based thinking, right? We know that each state establishes their own rules, including the award criteria and data collection. So I would encourage you to think about and find out more, if you're not sure, what's happening in your state and how can you or your site support the state seal of biliteracy for students. We know that clear guidance is available for the implementation of effective bilingual education, especially for English learners. This, of course, is the bureaucratic labeling. We also refer to them as multilingual learners, but ELs, because that's, we have the EL roadmap. It's really English learner roadmap. And also, I've never used this platform, Elevation. I like to make sure I underscore that, but it is a tool that I've heard English language development teachers and administrators talk about, and I'm sure there are others like it. But Elevation in California is a platform that facilitates accurate documentation and simplified compliance. So, for example, what level the student has tested at for ELD placement, English language development placement. Because I'm a former ELD teacher, and I can tell you that if we didn't have the data, they were right away put in English language development level 1, and it took time to get them tested and replaced. And sometimes they might even be a level 3. Or level 4 and be ready to reclassify out. But because it takes time to find out, either get the testing information or provide results of our own through in-house testing, it sets students back, right? It's leaving them out of opportunities. So these types of programs help simplify that. We also know that legislation like Proposition 58 in California legally provides the option for multilingual education in public schools, along with guidance to district schools and county offices of ed. And it provides parental rights for requesting bilingual or biliteracy programs. And this is really important because this includes dual language immersion, developmental bilingual programs, world language programs, and heritage language programs. And I can tell you that in California, if 20 parents, and so you might have something similar in your state that you want to check out or petition that this be added. In California, if 20 parents per grade level at a school site or 30 parents in general at a school site request, whether in writing or verbally, that they would like a multilingual program, the school, district, or county office of education must take a series of actions and provide an answer within 60 days. It's not something they can just say, oh, we'll take it under advisement and get back to you. There is a formalized process where they have to, and they might still answer no, but guess what? Parents can appeal it. And I know of sites in my city even where this has become very successful. Living in San Diego, very close to the border, I can share with you that bilingual education programs are highly available in those areas that we talked to you about earlier, where we have families that are more affluent, have had opportunities for more education than other families, and have requested this because they see it as great. My child will have this extra skill and we'll have better potential for getting into college. We'll have higher potential for getting hired into the workforce, is more well-rounded. We'll be able to travel, right? All these things are excellent, and I wouldn't take them away from anybody, but we also want to make sure they're available to everybody, right? That's really what we want to make sure that happens here. And so this is an excellent kind of opportunity that a lot of parents don't know about. And so, of course, we're here to share that tonight. We hope you share the word that parents have a say and they should use it.
Monique, can I
Yes.
just interrupt you? I'm sorry to
Sure.
interrupt you, but Nidia had a question about charter schools, and I don't know. And I think, Nidia, that you're referring to, does the rule of 20 apply to charter schools, or is it only district schools? Do you know?
That's a great question, and I believe I'm going to just speculate. I'm not sure. I believe it could apply to charter schools if they're in a district, because they have to be chartered to a district, right? So it's still public school,
Mhm.
but they are sort of able to kind of make their own rules, and so there could be a loophole there for them. I know that a lot of charter schools are forming with intentions around having opportunities such as dual language immersion. That's kind of one of their pulls, what their draws, right, for families. So, but that's a really good question. And Nivea, I will look into that more just for my own knowledge, but thanks for raising it.
Okay, thank you. Because we had my daughters went to charter school, and we had some concerns in trying to get some things, and then they were saying we have to send it to it was Aspire directly to the HQ, and then they said no, we have to follow the local district rules. So I was like, so now what? We have to follow both of them, and then at the same time, one says take the ball to the other one, and vice versa. So, because we still are in contact with that school parents. So, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking the question. That's a great question. Okay, so engaging, guiding, and supporting parents. First of all, make sure that parents know and caregivers know and understand their rights overall and for bilingual education options, right? Make sure we're dispelling myths and sharing digestible data regarding the value of being bilingual and biliterate. And so, for example, multilingual learners show greater academic success. We know that multilingual learners gain stronger communication skills overall. We know that they're more prepared for higher paying jobs. And this also has positive social emotional effects. And I would say the opposite of that is when we take away a student's opportunity to lean into their linguistic heritage, whether it's because they already speak the language or they're learning it on their own while they're also proficient in English, perhaps, or another language. When we take that away from them, that is erasure. It's rooted in deficit thinking and practice, and it's harmful. It makes them feel oftentimes ashamed or like there's something wrong, and that they need to kind of push that skill away. Meanwhile, like we said in other districts, we have families that are more economically resourced and perhaps have the affordances of higher education on their side, and they're seeing it as a benefit. So why would we want to take it away from other people, right? Do we see the disparity there? We want to make sure we're creating an open, welcoming, and supportive school climate so conversations and co-decision making can occur. That we're creating outreach and networking opportunities through site advisory councils in California. Some examples are the SSC, ELAC, and DLAC committees, and at times and in formats that are convenient for parents. So if we're going to do a cafecito with the principal, or a parent-teacher organization meeting, and we're going to hold it at noon, well, or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that could be rough for parents that are either have childcare issues, right, for younger children, have multiple pickups and drop-off times, right, and are working. So very important to keep in mind that we need to potentially offer virtual programming and at times that work for working parents. And then make sure that in your district that you contact experts that may be partnering, and then also other experts in the field, like, for example, CABE, which is a main group here in California. The national group is NABE, and then, like I mentioned, other dual language researchers that may be partnering with your district. Maggie's going to go ahead and share some recommendations for you all.
Thank you. I was just going to put Gabe in the chat, but I'll do that after. So some local recommendations: launching bilingual or dual language programs in schools with high EL enrollments. Really prioritizing the students, the multilingual learners or the English learners, to have access to this kind of programming that we know is more effective for their learning. Committing additional resources to expanding existing programs, and particularly in schools with high English learner enrollments. Communicating with the EL's families about bilingualism in culturally sensitive ways and their home languages. We talked a little bit about this throughout the presentation too. And prioritizing training for teachers and administrators to be able to support cultural and linguistic competency in family communication. So what does it look like? Even if you speak the language that your parents speak, there might be culturally or ways, right, or different, you might use different vocabulary than the parent. And so really knowing the nuances of what that looks like to communicate with parents. And then ensuring that ELs have prioritized access to dual language programs, which includes the enrollment lotteries. For state and federal recommendations, for California specifically, requiring high EL districts to consider expanding dual language education within their local control and accountability plans. Expanding, it's all about the money too, right? Expanding dual language immersion grants to 75 million annually, growing bilingual teacher professional development programs to $200 million annually. For all states, and Monique mentioned this this rule in California as well. In Texas, it's known as the Rule of 20, is mandating bilingual education for districts with 20 or more English learners with the same home language in a school. There are a few states that do this, but it's not a very common practice, and it could be a really powerful practice. And providing higher education credit for all seal of biliteracy recipients considering teaching careers. So really incentivizing people to get their seal, and multilingual learners to get their seal of biliteracy. And for Congress, sort of laugh because my husband, he doesn't work on education, but he works for Congress. Increase Title III funding to $1.5 billion annually. And launch 500 million in new competitive grants for growing bilingual programs. I don't think those things will happen right now, but these are recommendations, and things can change. So yes, those are some of our recommendations. And then the final word. So I'm going to read this quote. This was one of the parent participants, and that we really enjoyed reading this quote, and think it sums up this presentation and our findings very well. So I think statistically they're children smarter because they learned two languages and they learned how to implement it, like how to use the words properly, how to apply it to their life in two different languages. So I think statistically they're smarter. I feel like nobody has ever said, oh my God, knowing two languages makes you dumber. No one has ever said that. I don't know why knowing something else wouldn't be a benefit to you. So that was an English speaking parent in Fresno. Um, yeah, so on that note,
First of all, thank you all so much for joining us. And then I'm seeing some things that we could address in the chat. If I've skipped anybody, please feel free to just copy and paste your question.
Eduardo, I just see Eduardo's advocating for, wait, it just got bumped there, to invertir en la preparación de futuros maestros bilingües. And there are a couple, I will just say, and I have one of my colleagues on the call, there are some efforts from funders to try pilot pipeline programs to really try to get a bilingual teacher pipeline in various ways and with various higher ed or higher ed institutions and districts. And I think that is a very important plug because even if you had a rule of 20 in a district, like if we implemented that in DC, you still need the teachers. So that's a very important piece of it. And I think yes, I totally highlight that. Thank you for bringing that up.
So, and I was kind of just scrolling up and I'm seeing that there's potentially gentrification of the state seal of biliteracy in districts. I don't even know how that would work. I guess picking and choosing where it can be offered, but in terms of the school site, but that's unfortunate. And um, yeah, something potentially to look into more.
I think
And
Monique probably like thinking about English speaking parents who then have their kids learn a second language and then they are able to get a seal of biliteracy, perhaps have more access to that, like knowing how the game works. That's what my impression was from that comment.
Could be, could be. I guess I just was thinking about it in terms of if it's specific sites that are offering it or particular
Mhm.
parents that are petitioning it. Um, Incumbent on us, right? Thinking back to that model of we're all researchers, we're all co-decision makers, potentially finding a way to activate in your district and advocate on behalf of students if you know you're drawn to that, and bringing it up to site admin or to a superintendent to make sure that it's something that's widely available to all students, would be potentially a route to go. In all highly developed countries, they strive to ensure their students are bilingual, potentially, right? But we know there are equity gaps to this. So it's an area that we can improve in, I think, in the United States, as we've shown tonight, that the research supports that. There are some good things happening, but there's more we can be doing. Glad to hear that Elevation has been successful in a district. Like I said, I've never used it, but I've heard good things about it. Um, I'm going to look into the charter schools just for my own knowledge. I'm not sure about that. Um, Interesting to look at other bilingual education decision makers, older students. And this is an important comment. They're all important, but as a former high school teacher, it resonated with me. We wish we could keep, Katarina says, we wish we could keep more kids who were successful in dual language in elementary language programs in high school, but there are many things that seem to draw them away from language programs at that age. So tying back to the previous comment about how multilingualism is really championed in a lot of parts of the world. And so the question is, why does our education system pull them away towards other things then, right? And really, if it's our public education system, that means it's administrations, and social, the social, how we're prioritizing socially the skill, right? So, just something to keep in mind that these are macro issues, unfortunately, in our systems and institutions that oftentimes deter students, even as they may not be aware of it, from being interested in certain things, including multilingual education. Um, and Maggie was reinforcing that. Does California Department of Ed, Malia asks, or anyone else collect data on how often parents request this? I don't know if they do, but I'll tell you, because we have this protocol, I would imagine at the district level, it has to be documented because they have to be able to give an answer, yes or no. And so they must be putting that information somewhere. I'm not on that. And so this is purely speculation. But again, because there are formal procedures on how to respond to parents, and I know of districts where they've had to apply like 3 or 4 times, petition 3 or 4 times before they get taken seriously. There must be some data collection that goes into it, even if it's just at the local level. Shaylee says, yes, in Iowa, there's not even a bilingual educator license. You either have an ESL endorsement or you might be certified to teach Spanish. So again, the making sure that we are understanding the lack of uniformity in what it takes to become qualified to teach a particular language, and how rigorous then is the teacher going to be able to deliver the content. Or on the other hand, is it too complicated and it deters people who are qualified and would deliver rigorous content away from getting the endorsement or the bilingual education credential, right? In California, it's very licensure requirements are there's quite a lot of red tape and quite a lot of hoops to jump through. Whereas in other states, it's a lot easier, right? And so similar with the state seal of biliteracy, each state is determining its own rules and criteria. And so it may be easier to get it in some places and harder in others. And so is that a good thing, or is it something we should look into and try to standardize and have more clear communication around, right? I would like to advocate for investment in the preparation of future. I think Maggie and I and everybody else would agree with that. Investment in preparation of future bilingual teachers with a long-term perspective. Eduardo dice, me gustaría defender la idea de invertir en la preparación de futuros maestros bilingües. Es el futuro a largo plazo. Totally agree. Maggie, if you have any things to add to this, I just want to make sure people understand this time was for Q&A, and because mics are closed, want to make sure they're being questions are being elevated. But I hope I'm saying the name right. But Maeva asked, is tonight specifically focused on Spanish as a second language? I noticed the feedback was more from Spanish-speaking Latina families. And you know what? I'm glad you asked that. Maggie, you might have something to add. But specifically, I can tell you that Latinos are the largest historically minoritized population in the United States. And by way of that, Spanish is the most common second language or first language for that population, right? In California, over 50% of our K through 12 students identify as Latino or Latina. And so that's why the focus was specifically on them. But Maggie may have more to add because I know Connor has provided context on this too.
I don't think I have much to add. I would say, yes, it's the largest minority group, and I think over 80% of multilingual learners are Spanish speaking in the US in the K through 12 school system. So, and I know like DCPS only has Spanish English dual language programs, which is interesting. But so because of the prevalence of Spanish speakers.
Mm-hmm. So yes, the study was specifically just to answer the question really quick. The study was specifically designed for Latinas and with consideration of Spanish as a first or second language and in the context of bilingual education. But a lot of what we shared tonight would be applicable to language learners from any background. And so the rest of these are just, I do think Iowa offers flexible options for assessments for students to show proficiency. So that's great. Maria says, I'm dealing with a situation with my 6-year-old was a Spanish speaker, only no English at all. And it was tough. I struggled so much with her wanting to attend because her being shy to attending and not understanding. Of course, she has overcome that challenge and she's learning English and we have conversations. That's great. So I'm hoping that also means she's not losing her Spanish while she's also learning her English and she's bilingual, multilingual. So that's amazing. Katarina says, we're all in competition for those great bilingual teachers. So many districts don't choose to have a bilingual credential. Right. Yes. And in California, the bilingual teacher education programs, unfortunately, have gotten difficult and were reduced It's getting better, but they were reduced for a long time. Funding for them was reduced for a long time because of Prop 187 and 227 here in California. So even though that legislation is over 25 years old and one was canceled and the other one was repealed, it did so much harm for bilingual education. So it was anti-immigrant and anti-English legislation is what those did. So really, really harmed the state of California in a variety of ways. And unfortunately, we find ourselves in this wave again, right? Regardless of how we feel, I always like to say this, regardless of how we feel politically and about our current administration, the facts are the facts, and we are dealing with an administration that does not place a high value on uh, multilingualism, multiculturalism. We did hear a nice, promising tidbit from Connor yesterday that they upheld the current amount of Title III funding, which is what funds a lot of programs that are for, or the programs that are for multilingual learners. But as Maggie mentioned, we'd like to see that increase significantly. So at least they didn't take it away. They're dismantling the Department of Education and other programs, right? And taking away federal funding for other things from students. But at least for now, that funding is intact. I know we're past our time, so if people need to log off, it's totally understandable. We really thank you for your time, and I want to give Maggie the last word because I've been kind of going through all the chats here.
Oh, well, this has been a pleasure, and it's really fun to see some familiar faces and names from former days of EL Pandemic Recovery Forum that we ran through the Century Foundation, and some colleagues. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you all so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.